After this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white, with palm branches in their hands. They cried out in a loud voice, saying, "Salvation belongs to our God who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb." And all the angels stood around the throne and around the elders and the 4 living creatures, and they fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, singing, "Amen. Blessing and glory, wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen." Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these robed in white, and where have they come from?" I said to him, "Sir, you are the one that knows." And then he said to me, "These are they who have come out of the great ordeal. They washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason they are before the throne of God and worship God day and night within the temple. And the one who is seated on the throne will shelter them. They will hunger no more, and thirst no more. The sun will not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of water of life. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As I said last week, it's easy to get caught up in the images, the stuff we don't understand, the strange visions of creatures and elders and thrones and lambs on the throne. We have to remember that the book of Revelation is not about what may happen in the future, and we have to figure out which one of the beasts we have to kill off in order to be faithful. That is not what the book is about. It was never intended to be that. It was a way of encouragement for those who were under the thumb of oppression. It was a way of talking about the powerful without them getting it. It was a way of explaining that what we may see around us is not the last part of the story, and then to talk about Rome in such a way that Rome wouldn't know, because they called them Babylon. As I face this text this week, we see the elders again, and this great multitude for the first time. And I began to think, what on earth could this passage have for us today? I'm less interested today in preaching the whole text of the book of Revelation, which we did a little bit last week and spent a little bit of time in the text. And I've been kicking around again and again the rich imagery in this passage. It's always intended to be just outside our understanding. We Westerners really like good Orthodox theology. That's why the Western liberal church has spent so much time with Paul, because, well, we like Greek philosophy. But then we get to this book of Revelation, and it's these weird images and poetry and worship, and it's really hard to nail down because there's this weird cyclical pattern, because what it requires of is an act of faithful imagination, and our imaginations have been captured by Disney and a few other things. And so when we enter these, we have to think, what is in this passage, and live with it for a while. And this is what happened. And it's been almost 18 years that I have been preaching, and this is one of those days you think never comes your way. But I'm actually a little nervous about what I found and began to see, and so I've been avoiding hitting it head on just yet. So here's where we're going to go. It's no great revelation to say that nationalism is on the rise once again. In Europe, we have seen that far-right nationalist parties are growing in power. They have representation at the highest levels. The most worrisome, at least as they're reporting these days, is Hungary. Their parties there are rearing their heads in ways that we have not seen since World War II. The reality is 70 years ago, and then before that, almost 100 years ago, we fought two wars in Europe that really were rooted in the rise of nationalism. And while there are many issues that feed these movements, what we know in the worldwide growth of nationalism, not just in Europe, but also in Asia and in the continent of Africa, what is driving this most often is the issue of immigration, the number one issue listed, as the EU magazine pointed out. But again, this is not just happening in Europe. Japan is seeing it. And many of these movements actually look towards the person of Vladimir Putin as inspiration, of someone who can bring us back to a sense of pride in who we are as a people. The question is, who defines who we are talking about when we say that? But it always is a part in these movements of being racialized. There is a racialized component to all of the movements for nationalism. But what is particularly worrisome for those of us who are Christians in North America is that our own president has become inspiration. While unwilling to support, he has been unwilling to reject as well. And the unwillingness to challenge white nationalism in Charlotte was only one of many examples, surrounding himself with people who have ties to what we call the alt-right movement. Usually we'll just call them Nazis in the past. That's wrapped up in pride and heritage and white power. And as a people of faith, we have to ask ourselves, what resources do we have to offer? Because in our silence, too often, we have failed in our responsibility of faith. As we watch, though, many religious groups and leaders are rallying behind the rising nationalism. We as Presbyterians are Presbyterian Church in the United States, not of the United States, and there's a really important reason for that. And I think it's important for those of us who follow this Lamb that was slain on the throne to ask, what does the Bible have to say about any of these kinds of things? The Bible talks a lot about immigration. Usually they call them aliens, and always to welcome them, by the way. But in the language of today, and this is scary stuff, and it's important, and we need to talk about it, we hear our leaders calling immigrants less than human beings, vermin, who infest, quote unquote, the nation. And yet, there is nothing coming from the followers of Jesus who seem to have the president's ear on these issues. Or when the president laughs this past week at the suggestion that we should shoot immigrants who come to the United States seeking asylum. Friends, it's not a joke. These are the same Christian leaders who've remained silent. And I'm wondering if it is the same faith of which we share. The silence speaks volumes, so we ought to say something about it. And what are we to say? Well, the good news is the lectionary kind of forced our hands with that this morning. It shows us that we are not the first people to deal with this growing hatred. And it shows us that God does not condone it at all. It's important to review a few things, though, about the book of Revelation, which is so often misunderstood and so often misinterpreted. The book, as I said before, is intended as a word of encouragement for those facing oppression and a word of challenge to those who live comfortably in systems that oppress other people. The images of heaven reveal a truth that says the empires of the world do not have the last word. But what we know is the imperial courts throughout history have always claimed divine mandate. God is on our side. But what the images of Revelation say in the end is that they are all judged by God, and that they all will come to an inglorious end. No empire has survived all that, despite claims to eternity. However, those who have been grist for the mill of the empire, it turns out in this vision, will be given the places of honor and glory. How How do we know that? Because the people who are wearing the white robes are the ones who in their lifetime were hungry, who were thirsty, who were left out to the elements to scorch under the heat. The comfortable folks weren't doing that. That's how we know who they are. The death of empire does not have the last word. The empire only has that last word of power over life and death, and yet they don't really have the power of life. The symbol of the Lamb reminds us of that. Though Jesus was slaughtered by the empire, Jesus now lives in glory and power and might. But not as a great warrior who's coming back to get even with everybody, as a slain lamb who will take care of those who had bad shepherds in life. Now in our passage for today, and this is important, it comes right after another image which we did not read. Some of you might have heard that somewhere in Revelation that only 144,000 people will be saved, the rest of us are in trouble. That's the image right before this one. And I think it's not an accident that those images are put together. Why is that? Well, some of our brothers and sisters of the faith had taken that to suggest that the number of people that God will save is really limited. And you better be faithful. But right on the heels of that vision is rooted in one that is not about nation. It is something much more, because that vision of the 144,000 is about the nation of Israel. Not as we understand it today, as it was understood then. And then you have this image which could be taken to being very nationalistic, right? Only this group of people will be saved because God's on our side. That's imperial theology, by the way. And then right there, just to make sure that nobody's mistaken, the other image that's put forth here, a great multitude that no one could count. And they go on. That would be enough, right? So many people that no one could count. But gets very specific here. From every nation. From all the tribes. And all peoples. And all languages. God moves from the vision of nation-specific with limited number to something rather radical. A great multitude that no one could count. No census estimates. No arguing over crowd size with the National Parks Department. Simply a crowd too big to count. But this was not just any crowd. It was a crowd that included people from every nation. Every nation on earth standing side by side, not in national caucuses, but together with people from every tribe and all people and all languages together worshiping God. This crowd serves as God's no to the ways in which human beings like to reduce and dissect and homogenize and frankly gentrify everything. What holds them together here? Who are these people? What's right there in the text? Those who have come from the great ordeal. Now, often that is interpreted as the final battle. But that's not what the text is really saying. And while we do not know for sure, there is a sense that it is any time there are people who have been part of the grist mill of empire, those who have been murdered, those who've been lynched, those who've been conscripted, those who've been enslaved, those who have been used in the arenas for our entertainment, and those who have been used up and washed up by the empire so that somebody else can get a tax cut or something like that. Throughout the history of the Bible, throughout all of the stories, God takes sides with those who are facing oppression always. It's not because they're righteous especially, it is because God doesn't like bullies. Ask Pharaoh, ask Rome, ask Babylon. In the face of the empires of the world, claims of greatness, or God's special blessing, this image here shames all of that. At the end of the day, there is no way around this. In a few weeks, we'll be talking about Pentecost, and talking about nations and languages and peoples from all over the world. It is God's continual no to the nationalism which infests human thinking and has historically led us to do monstrous things. When we believe that we are special above others, it doesn't take long to believe what we're doing to them is righteous in and of itself. The lamb that was at the center of these images then becomes the shepherd. Not the warrior, but the shepherd. To those who have been slaughtered by the empires of the world. And the image of the shepherd is always, in the Bible, a political one. You have to go back to the Old Testament to unpack it. But the idea of shepherd is what the kings of Israel were supposed to be. Caring for the poor, the widow, the orphan, the immigrant. Making sure that justice was not just for those who could afford it, but taking sides in cases of justice when there was injustice with those who did not receive it. The shepherd image in the Bible is about leadership that cares about the least of these. Anybody who is most vulnerable and slaughtered, the lamb that was slaughtered stands with and fights for. In a world where leaders do not do this, it is an image of the great no from God. For anyone who wants to claim that God is on their side, even when they act in ways that do not reflect the ways of the shepherd here. Now, the thing I know is that this image may not provide a clear hope to stopping the growing tide of nationalism sweeping the globe as it does here at home. But I want to say really clearly that nationalism and Christianity are incompatible. Period. No image of salvation allows for this interpretation to stand. But here's the other thing. If we're not careful, we can lead into this, well, it happens after we're dead, so there's nothing for us to do right now. I might as well get what I can for me and mine. That's not how the biblical images work. That's how our Western mind likes to take it. We want to separate it and put it into separate camps. What happens now, and then what happens in the spirit world later after we die. The problem was that was never the Jewish understanding. Jesus didn't understand the world that way. What was going on in heaven had an impact on how we might live today. This future hope is a hope that reminds us that death doesn't have the last word. And death is a powerful motivator, wrapped in fear. But because we have this future hope, we are set free to speak and to act in ways that are in harmony with this vision. To figure out how we might be part of trying to imitate this vision of borderless faith. Where God is not on the side of one or the other. But when we feed the ways of separation, we can be really clear that we are not on the side of God. As always, what I say is, in the face of all of this, it can be easy to become overwhelmed and despairing, but the truth is, the richness of our faith does not allow us that luxury. Despair is a luxury of the comfortable, and we cannot afford it. We have to figure out in our own lives, what is our sphere of influence? We all have some area that we have the ability to influence others. So where are you in your own lives able to say no to the powers of death? You may not have a ready answer to that question, but that question ought to carry with you. Because of this vision of the future that is intended to be lived out in the present, it should enable us to think a little bit more creatively about our faith and the ways in which we must and can work to follow that way of life. We cannot do everything, but we can be a part. Even the smallest step is a step in the right direction. God will work out the rest. So let us take hope An encouragement that in the end, the death-dealing ways of the empire are already rejected by God. Even if they will not go quietly, their days are numbered. And some days I wonder, they probably know that more fully. That's why they get really angry. Because in the end, we know the simple truth, that if it is not rooted in love and life and community and wholeness for all, whatever it is not of God. And it's because of that we should listen again to the voices of those who have come from their own great ordeals and hear their words of encouragement when they say amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be not to the empires of the world, but to God and to the Lamb forever and ever.